Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Maneuvers, which is episode 11 of season 2 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Voyager, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the second season episode, Maneuvers. So Maneuvers is the episode in which Seska comes back on the Kazon ship with Maj Kola, and together they attack Voyager using her extensive knowledge, and Kazon managed to break on board the ship and steal transporter technology. Chakotay feels personally slighted by her because he was once in love with her. And so he goes off, defies orders, goes off on the shuttle on his own to try to destroy the transporter technology, and he manages to succeed in doing so. However, is taken captive by the Kazon. Meanwhile, Maj Kola is trying to gather an alliance of other Kazon sects, which is usually unheard of, but him having the Voyager technology gives him this advantage. And Janeway must decide if she wants to risk the ship in order to try to rescue Chakotay. Tuvok argues against it, but B'Elanna argues for it, and eventually Janeway goes with her gut, decides to go rescue Chakotay. However, when they attempt to do so, they find themselves being attacked by 8 Kazon ships, which is severely outnumbered, and they try to beam Chakotay on board, but Seska continually blocks it. But then Janeway comes up with the other idea to beam Maj Kola and the other Majes on board Voyager so they can exchange them for Chakotay, which works. However, Janeway decides to just put Chakotay on report for his defying orders. And then Seska leaves a message for Chakotay telling him that while he was unconscious, she extracted some of his DNA and impregnated herself with his child. Alright, so I usually start with my personal experience with this episode, with the episode I'm talking about, and I will give a little warning that in this case some people might consider my personal experience a little bit TMI. It's not that big of a deal, but so let's just say when I was watching this episode for the first time, when it first aired, I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we were not paying any attention to the episode. I guess you would call it Star Trek and chill. Yeah, so, and I didn't get a chance to watch it again after, because usually they show it twice in a week, but for some reason I didn't watch it again. So I didn't actually see this episode until much later. I think it might have been in 99, or it might have been after that, early 2000s, I'm not sure, but something like that. I can't remember exactly when I actually saw it, but yeah, the first time I had no idea what was going on because I was not paying any attention. And I caught the part at the end. I saw Seska, so I knew Seska was there as a Cardassian. But and then I caught the part at the end where she said she impregnated herself with Chakotay's child, and I was like, "What? What?" And so in later episodes, which I did watch when they first aired, such as Basics and Alliances, I was a little bit lost. I didn't really catch all of the references of all the other Majes and Kola trying to steal the transporter technology, and the Kazon using a ramming ship to ram Voyager. It's funny because I always think of, I mentioned this before in a couple of my other videos, but it's been a while. But there was this Star Trek collectible card game that I used to play, similar to like Magic cards or something like that. It was really big in the late 90s. Early 2000s is when it started to die off, and that's when I was playing it the most. But so before I actually saw this episode, when I was actually paying attention to it, I got the Voyager set of the cards, and they had, like, the Kazon had this game mechanism where you could take the shuttles and ram another ship and, put your people on board your opponent's ship in order to attack them. And I had no idea what was that in reference to. I'm like, when did the Kazon ever do this? And then I saw this episode, and I was like, oh, okay, this is when they did that one episode I wasn't paying any attention to. Okay. But anyway, so I'm probably less familiar with this episode. It does kind of affect my viewing. The episodes that I've seen less than other episodes. But anywho, so I like Seska as a villain. I've been on the record saying this on my channel several times. I think she was the best villain that Voyager had. So if you consider State of Flux her first episode as a villain, because before that she was kind of just a background character, or in Prime Factor she was like the devil on B'Elanna's shoulder, but let's just say her first actual episode as a villain was State of Flux. That means she only appeared in 5 episodes as a villain, and that's if you count Basics Parts 1 and 2, which I don't, so it's really 4 episodes. It's State of Flux, this episode, Alliances, and Basics. I believe that's it. I didn't actually look this up, but I'm pretty sure it's just those 4. So she wasn't in the show a whole hell of a lot. And then, of course, her appearances after, post-mortem appearances, like, what's that one called? Worst Case Scenario, and then Shattered in season 7, so you could say 6, but those 2 were like later, but really in their prime it was 4. Yeah, but I still think she's a great villain, even though she didn't appear all the hell of a lot. Tomlok only appeared 3 times. A lot of people consider him a classic Romulan villain of TNG. And she actually did appear in this series more than that, if you count all of her appearances before she turned evil, or was revealed to be evil, I should say. And her post-mortem appearances, she appeared a bit more than that. What was that? It would be something like 8 or 10 times, something? I don't know, something like that. But anyway, I don't know, because when I was saying that she was the best villain, I guess I was going off of State of Flux more than anything. Great, this sucks. I like to call it. Gate for trucks. Because, and there's also Basics. But in Alliances, she doesn't really do that much. Like, the episode's not really about her. So it's more of like Basics and this episode and State of Flux, really. And, the 2 post-mortem episodes, but they don't really count. One's a holodeck image of her, and the other is like this weird timeline BS. But I think that when she did, I think this episode sort of exemplifies actually how great of a villain that she is, because she is able to outmaneuver Voyager in that opening scene. Like, the Kazon know their codes, they know like how to trick them into thinking that, it's a Starfleet thing, and because they knew they couldn't resist, and they knew where to attack Voyager and how to try to get through their shields, all because of Seska. And also when Chakotay went after her, she was able to discover him because she knew his tricks and stuff like that. But it was nice tit for tat in this episode, because Chakotay did like trick her and get the better of her because he managed to destroy the transporter technology and render the shuttle useless so that they no longer had any Starfleet technology. Which is very tricky. And I do like this scene. I don't know if I do like it because I was a little bit mixed on it actually when I first saw it. I was like, this is kind of cheesy. But I do like the resilience of Chakotay. And that's the scene where Kala is torturing him and he's just being like going on and on about how Seska is trying to manipulate him and is going to kill him and mentioning like, intimate details about her. And you could tell Kala, it was getting to him, but he was trying to act like it wasn't. It was good acting. I don't know. Part of me thought that was cheesy that Chakotay would act that way, but another part of me likes it because it shows his resilience, that he's able to withstand the torture and instead tries to play head games with this torture, kind of like what Picard did in Chain of Command. Not that this is anywhere near as good as that, but it was still, yeah, it was still interesting. So yeah, it was a good use of the Kazon. I know a lot of people hate the Kazon. I've spoken very poorly of them, particularly in the episode not Alliances, sorry. What was the episode called? Initiations, which I did not care for that episode. But honestly, like, most of their other appearances I do like. Like Caretaker, they were kind of dumb. I liked State of Flux. Didn't care for Initiations, but I like this episode. I like Alliances and I like Basics. Well, Basics Part 1. We'll get to it. Well, actually, I already reviewed it. I'll get to it and revisit it, but you can check out my review, which I have a lot of issues with Part 2, but Part 1 I like. So, even though I didn't like the Kazon, the idea of them, or they were mostly like a Klingon ripoffs, I got into this when I reviewed Initiation. They were actually mostly good episodes, if I think about it. If I look at the episodes they were in, most of them were actually good. So they were used well, even though they themselves are not that interesting. And I do like, it does feel like they have established lore. So I will give the writers credit for that. Because he talks about, they mentioned the Trabe again in this episode about how Kala would be the first Kazon to unite the sex since they conquered the Trabe and stuff like that. And a nice backstory with his relation with the first Maj. I do like that scene with the first Maj who came on board, who was being a total asshole. He's like, oh, we'll take it from here. We'll attack Voyager and give us the transporter technology, and we'll attack Voyager, and we'll give you some credit and thank you for helping us. Kala's like, no, fuck off. And I do love that scene, how it ends with, they pull their faces on each other, but Seska's like, why don't we just let them go back on the ship, wink wink, to think about it. And you see that Kala's like getting what she's saying, and then we see Voyager come up to the spot where they were, and it's like, oh, is there something floating in space? And we see it's those two guys. I think that's a really cool reveal. I like how they revealed that. I like how they didn't actually show Kala or Seska beaming them into space, that they just like had that wink wink, ended the scene, and then showed Voyager seeing dead bodies. That was cool. And Neelix, to his credit, was actually very useful in this episode. He does seem to be an expert on Kazon. I don't know how that happened, but he's helpful in regarding like the situation with the sex and how it's unusual for them to collaborate. But also, he was like, Janeway originally thought that the two dead bodies were accidents, that them trying to use the transporter, but Neelix was there to point out. I was like, nah, I think they did this on purpose. I think they were executed because this is the Maj of a rival sect. So yeah, so that was all a good setup. and how Janeway had to trick them, like they went around Seska because Seska was blocking B'Elanna from beaming Chakotay on board, but Janeway found another way around to beam the Majas on board and then barter them for Chakotay, which is clever. So, couple other things. So, Chakotay disobeying orders and getting what essentially amounts to a slap on the wrist for doing so. I don't know if it was, probably wasn't this episode, because I think my sister was in college at the time, and so I wasn't watching Star Trek with her or talking to her about it. So not this episode, but there's been other episodes, and maybe even other movies outside of Star Trek, or other like Star Trek stuff like TNG, where we had this joke between us that whenever someone put someone on report, it was like, whoa, no, not report. Oh no. I think there was even this stupid parody movie. I think it was called Spaceship. Came out in the 80s with Leslie Nielsen. That was like a parody off of Alien. For the most part, I thought it was a crappy movie, but it had a few good jokes, and I think one of them was when Leslie Nielsen as the captain told this guy, I was like, I'm putting you on report, and he was like, whoa. I think we used to say that all the time, and that's kind of the reaction here. However, I do like this scene, actually, that's Chakotay's response, because Janeway is like, I'm putting you on report if that means anything, because they're out in the middle of nowhere, so it really doesn't mean anything. But Chakotay says it means something to me. It means I disappointed you, and I regret that. That was powerful. I love that. That was a really good line. It was a really good moment between the two of them. I think it did justify sort of Janeway's reaction. But apparently, the writer, Kenneth Biller, which I will reserve my criticism of him in this episode, because I thought he did a good job in this particular episode. But he apparently was very upset because he wanted Janeway to throw Chakotay in the brig. He was like, yeah, if someone did this to Picard would throw their ass in the brig. And so he was like deadpan, like arguing, wrote it that way, but the producers overrid him. In fact, they rewrote the scene without his permission. They were like flat out, no, you can't do that. And you know why? Because they wanted to smash that reset button as hard as they possibly could. They're like, oh, we can't have Chakotay, our first officer, be in the brig. You know, it's funny because later in season 5 they throw Tom Paris in a brig for an episode, but it's only for one episode, and then he's out by the end of the episode. Like, they could have done that for Chakotay. They could have thrown him in the brig in this episode, and then the next episode is like, oh, I'm out of the brig now. Like, you don't have to, like, I guess they didn't want to reference this at all, but which is funny because they do reference Seska again, and the fact she said she was pregnant, so they do reference this episode again. So I don't know why they couldn't make that small little reference. And season 2, as I mentioned before, is when Pillar was still on board, so he was still pushing for some sort of continuity and serialization, and they would push him out specifically for that reason. And then that's why season 3 and onward, they would smash the reset button even fucking harder. Although season 4 with the 7 to 9 storyline was an exception, and then season 6 you had the brief storyline with the Borg kids. But for the most part, yeah, they loved, especially season 3, they fucking loved that reset button. Well, okay, so there's the hollow emitter, to be fair, in season 3. But other than that, they fucking love that reset button. And that's why they got rid of Pillar. But anyway, that's another story that I'll get into later. So I actually disagree with Kenneth Pillar on this one. even though I'm a fan of continuity, as you know. I actually think it worked. I don't think it was necessary for Janeway to throw Chakotay in the brig. I think the scene was probably more emotional with her saying, putting on report if that means anything, and Chakotay being like, oh, that means something to me. Like that, to me, that's more emotionally powerful and more meaningful than just throwing him in the brig. And to be honest, like, I actually disagree with Kenneth Biller. I don't think Picard would have thrown his ass in the brig. Because Picard, I mean, there's the Pegasus. Picard threw Riker in the brig temporarily, but he didn't even want it to. It was Riker's idea, and he just let him out immediately. I don't know. Picard seems to let people off pretty lightly. And then Worf, when he, like, defied orders and like killed Duras, like as a Starfleet officer, like took off his badge and ignored them so he could go off and murder someone. Slap on the wrist is all he got. And I think there's other examples where Picard just gives us. So I actually think this is normal for Star Trek, is my point. I think I wouldn't expect Chakotay to be thrown in the brig. I think that would be abnormal for Star Trek, especially since, like, he did manage to destroy that technology. Now, granted, they had to risk the ship to rescue him, but he told them not to do that. But of course, they're not going to listen to him. And he nearly got himself killed and deprived Voyager of the very valuable first officer. So that was, a naughty thing. But I still think it's normal for the response to be. That's just normal in Star Trek, what I get. I don't know what show Kenneth Biller was watching, but I don't think it would have been normal to throw him in the brig. So I actually side with the producers, funnily enough. And I usually hate the reset button, you know me, but actually kind of worked for me here. Now, getting into the piece of continuity, as I said, that they do follow up on Seska being pregnant. For the most part, like, I remember a lot of people having a huge issue with this, saying, oh, you can't, that's not a thing. You can't impregnate yourself with someone's DNA. That's not a thing. Look, this is Star Trek. They can always just be like, oh, 24th century technology, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they have transporters and warp drive, which are practically magical and have no real basis in reality, real life science, or very, loose basis. Like, very unlikely these technologies will ever exist. And so when they want to say, oh, there's some weird 24th century technology that allows people to impregnate themselves with someone's DNA, it might have no basis in science, but neither does warp drive and transporters. So I don't give a shit. I'm willing to go right along with it. If they say there's a magic device that lets them do what the plot requires, fine. Doesn't bother me. In fact, I like this storyline. I keep thinking about basics. As I said, I already covered it. I mean, I'll cover it again for my Patreon supporters, but for most of you, I've already covered it. But because it's interesting, the dilemma that they're put in, how Chakotay has to decide if he should try to take care of the child, but in fact they use the child in order to lure him into a trap. But I always remember that his talking to, like, the spirit of his father, and him saying that the child was conceived against his will, and he doesn't know if he should, like, treat it as his own. But then his father, mentioned about their ancestors, how some women who were assaulted by other, men, European men, that they raised them as their own. And I thought that was an interesting comparison. And so I was thinking about that Chakotay was violated in that regard. So yeah, but then again, the whole thing with what this comes with was season 2 of them saying, oh, that's not Chakotay's child, that's actually Maz Kola's child. Reset button, smash! And that, of course, was surrounded by the politics of them firing Pillar, because Pillar was the one who wanted to continue the storyline with Chakotay's child, and they wanted to just wipe it under the rug, which I think was bad, lazy writing, and kind of ruined the show, and that they should have actually kept forward. It would have been way better, more interesting, much better character story if they kept Chakotay's fucking child and said it was his, and I think it ruined. But anyway, sorry. that is it makes me so angry. But that is, a problem with season 3, which I will get to. Actually, I am gonna make a separate video. My plan to make a separate video all about season 3 before I get to it, where I'm gonna rip into this. But anyway, that's pretty much I guess the other thing I'll mention about this episode is the relationship between Chakotay and B'Elanna. I think their friendship was definitely stronger in the earlier season because they both come from the Maquis. We do see them occasionally in later seasons, to be fair, but not as much, I think. And I think I like, for example, like how it started with them talking about playing some racquetball or some game. Tennis, was it? I don't remember. Some game, and Chakotay was saying that she was tensing up. But then later, when he was getting really, pissed off about Seska and taking it personally, B'Elanna's like, don't tense up. Like, that was a cool callback. And then I liked how B'Elanna was the one who went to bat for Chakotay with Janeway and tried to convince her, first of all, not to be too harsh on him, and secondly, to actually go and rescue him. And so that, I appreciate that, the strong character bonds that the earlier seasons have that later seasons don't. But anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neilhouse and Jordan Johnson. Thank you both so very, very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelesio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Alright, so we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, when people attack the Kazon, which I do admit is somewhat justified, people forget episodes like Maneuvers. Granted, what makes Maneuvers work well is Martha Hackett's excellent portrayal of Seska, perhaps one of the most interesting villains, and I'd say more interesting than Vadic from Picard. How she manages to work with Maz Kola, and how even here she manages to do what she can to manipulate Chakotay. The story, of course, focuses more on Chakotay's moral issue and how he wants to resolve things, which actually adds more to his character in ways that Tattoo definitely failed. The only ding I can throw in this episode is, of course, the soap opera reveal at the end, especially like most bad soap operas or even good ones like Downton Abbey will sometimes bring this big reveal and then often in the same episode take things back and make things normal at the end, no matter how unrealistic that is. With the reveal that Seska impregnated herself with Chakotay's DNA, later to be undone because the showrunners did not like it in Basics Part 2, yeah, it would reveal a reason why Chakotay especially would be attached to this more, but it's just a lame distraction. Granted, yes, characteristic of our otherwise obsidian order, well-disciplined and rather smart villain Seska is with her feelings for Chakotay, which we'd be reminded of all the way to Shattered in the series, and I admit well done, but if there is a baby that's supposed to be Chakotay's, it should have stayed the way through the end of the series, i.e. Naomi would have not been the only child until the Borg kids' rescue. I give the episode a 9 spaced Kazons out of 10. So to be clear, it wasn't because the showrunners didn't like it. It's because the showrunner that did like it got fired, and the other showrunner, well, mainly Rick Berman, didn't like it. So he's the one that fired. Be surprised. I'm blaming Rick Berman. What a shock! But yeah, it is kind of soap opera-y. I will definitely give you that, but I like the idea. And as you say, they should have kept Chakotay's child for the whole show. It would have been way more interesting. It could have been like Naomi Wildman. They could have had this interest. I don't know, because at first it would have to be a baby, and I know how the show hates to work with babies or whatever. But they did it with Molly. Now, granted, O'Brien wasn't the first officer like Chakotay is, but still, like, they would probably have to find a way to magically grow it fast like they did with Naomi. It was with Naomi and like Alexander and other characters like that. They just say, oh, it's because they're an alien and they grow fast. I suppose they could say the same thing because it would be half Cardassian. So they could be like, oh, it's because it's an alien. It's growing up. But they should, regardless, they should have kept it. 100% they should have kept it. And saying that Seska is better than Vadic, to me, that's like, duh. Vadic, I mean, not terrible, but she's really hammy. I didn't really care for her all that much. But anyway, so it's not, I think it's, obvious that she's better than Vadic. But anyway. Next comment is from Kyrie091. Who says, maneuvers more like man poo turds. I'm sorry about that one. I don't usually like to resort to such childish and sophomoric humor. I prefer classy, smart, and sophisticated comedy. Things like booty crap. Anyway, I don't remember this episode, so Mark is going to tell you guys whether I like it or not. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but Mark is never wrong in his Star Trek opinion, so I trust him. However, I've been gone for a few weeks, which means we have some catching up to do. Let's get this miserable booty crap out of the way. Rejoined, more like P-joined. Persistence of vision, more like persistence of pissing. Starship down, more like more like shart ship clown. Little green men, more like shittle mean kin. From the weird kin joke a couple weeks ago. Yeah, it's okay. I don't get it either. And finally, tattoo, more like shat poo. Glad that mess is over. Now we can focus on better things like discussing Vic Fontaine and why he really made Trek the best it's ever been. By dying! Oh. Anyway. So you apologize for the man poo turds, childish, poop jokes, but then you made another one. Actually, several other ones. You did Shart Ship Clown and Little Shittle Mean Ken. Shittle Mean Ken, yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not a fan of any of those. What does P-joined even mean? I know, not to criticize you too much. I know you're trying your best. I actually thought Man Poo Turds was fine. And as for if you like this episode or not, you love it because it has Seska in it, and she's not in Starfleet. Anyway, sorry. Next comment is from Antarius, who says, in memory, there are a lot of Seska episodes in the second season, so I was surprised the first Kazon episode is only the 11th episode of the season. Finally, we see Neelix being useful again instead of being jealous and annoying. Seska verbalizes the greatest flaw of the episode. The shuttle is much better prize than a single transporter module. That Chakotay wiped the memory core isn't enough in my opinion, because it means the hardware is still intact and that the software can certainly be reconstructed. The episode is engaging and exciting. We see some good acting by Robert Beltram and Martha Hackett. After Tuvok disobeys Janeway's orders in the first season, she now has to deal with the first officer's disobedience. Mark, do you think she should have thrown him in the brig for 30 days like Paris? The episode features too much technobabble. My rating is an 8 out of 10. I mean, I don't think it has more technobabble than the typical Voyager episode. Voyager is just a show filled with technobabble. I don't think that this episode was more guilty than what they usually are. I would say it's about average. Now, I already answered whether or not I think he should be thrown in the brig for 30 days. No, I don't. I think it's fine. I expect this kind of thing to be met with, the old slap on the old wrist. Now, so this isn't, just to be a bit nitpicky here for a second, it's actually not the first Kazon episode of this season that was Initiations. It's the first Seska episode of the season, so I'll grant you that. Maybe that's what you meant. And Seska actually didn't appear in a lot of second season episodes. As I mentioned, it was only 3? Yeah, it was only 3. This, Alliances, and Basics. Unless I'm forgetting something. Maybe I'm forgetting something. Hold on. I'm going to look this up because I want to make sure I am not forgetting something. Alright, I was forgetting something. She was in Life Science and Investigations. The whole Michael Jonas storyline. I forgot all about that. I forgot she was in it. Now, in Life Science, it was just a brief cameo. But she had a bigger part to play in Investigations, to be fair. So, really 4 episodes with 1 cameo, but that's still not like a whole hell of a lot. But anyway, in season 2. So, yeah, she was in it more than I thought. Okay, good thing I checked. Otherwise, I get people correcting me in the comments, which they'll probably do anyway. But anyway, let's see. Find my comments again. All right, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, this isn't a bad episode and Seska is really the highlight here, but I'm not a fan of the going rogue trope, especially when the rogue gets off scot-free. At least Chakotay did get a dressing down by the captain in the end. The torture/interrogation scene is an amazing scene. I love how Chakotay manipulates Cullen and tries to pit him against Seska, and Hackett's acting here is top notch. She doesn't have much dialogue, but looks on her face really do tell a great story. Voyager's set dressing looked unusually green in this episode. Sometimes the interior looks more gray, and sometimes the green highlights really pop out, like in this episode. I did not notice that myself. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, after watching this episode, Maj, Kola, and Seska don't deserve to be added to the list of Star Trek dumbest criminals. However, they should have done things in reverse order. Instead of attacking Voyager, they should have tried convincing some Kazon sect to help them take Voyager. It's not like Voyager had the ability to ring up Starfleet and ask them they needed aid regarding the Kazon. I almost said Klingon, Freudian slip. This is why Seska was only an undercover agent, as she isn't as cunning as Gul Dukat or Garrick. Bruce Chakotay Willis, or maybe Liam Chakotay Neeson, goes in all guns blazing and realizes he is no action hero, and then gets beaten up. I do like this episode. I just like to be different in my comments than the others. Puns are off the table, so dumb jokes are the way to go. So my rating is 8. I would have sent a fleet after Voyager. The Borg and Seska should read the book Gul Dukat never wrote, How to Terminate a Fleet of Planets in 20 Moves or 10. How to terminate a fleet or a planet in 20 moves or 10. So, I disagree with you on that the Kazon should have tried to unite the sects first and then attack Voyager, and here's why. And this is, I think, is explained in the episode. That if he tried to unite the sects before getting the transporter technology, the other Kazon would have just attacked him. And I think they made that clear, and that because even after he had the transporter technology, the other Kazon tried to attack him, and he used the transporter to kill them. And then so when he met with the other Kazon, they're like, "Oh, I see what you did there with using your advanced technology." So they respected him more, and they were more willing to listen to him and make an alliance with him. Whereas he tried before attacking Voyager, he probably would have gotten killed. So that's my counter argument. Even though, like, from the Starfleet perspective, yes, they can't call in reinforcements, but I don't think that's the concern. The concern is that the other sects would just try to kill him if he needed that technology to have the upper hand first. Let's see. And Seska is not as cunning as Gul Dukat or Garrick. Garrick, I'll grant you. But Gul Dukat, I don't know. That's the tough one. I would actually say they're about equal, because Gul Dukat can be dumb from time to time. From time to time, not always. And you bring up how Chakotay tried to be like Bruce Willis or Liam Neeson. I actually like the fact that they didn't make him an action hero like they did with Picard and Starship Mine. That he was vulnerable, and that he actually had... Well, his plan was to try to destroy the thing and then leave, but Seska discovered him, so he went like to plan B, where he expected to die. And he fully expected to die. And I did like how he just handed Seska the phaser instead of, like... I was thinking, like, he could have tried to hold her hostage and like, request a shuttle, but to try to leave. But I think he knew that would never work, so he didn't bother with that. But I don't know. If he thought he was going to die anyway, I mean, why didn't he just bother? I don't know. Maybe that's just not his... That's not his way to take someone hostage, not even Seska. I don't know, but they always talk about how in the Maquis you have to do dirty tricks. B'Elanna even mentions it in this particular episode, so... Counterpoint. Maybe he should have done it. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's... I think that's about it, I would say. The Seska would not team up with the Borg. That's as dumb as having the Changelings team up with the Borg. Anyway, thank you, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Maneuvers out of 10. I think I'm going to give this an 8. Yeah, I'm going to give this an 8. Extremely good. I was torn between an 8 and a 7. I think I might have given this a 7 in the past, but I think this is good enough to get an 8. Just barely. It's probably a weak 8. But as I said, I like the sort of cat and mouse thing between Seska and Chakotay, and how they're trying to outwit each other, and it does use the Kazon in an interesting way, which is, yeah, a big plus. But by the way, because I forgot about the Michael Jonas storyline, the Kazon do appear a lot more in this season than I thought. But yeah, that's we'll get to that. We'll get to that when we get to it. But yeah, I thought this was a pretty strong episode, and I liked that the Chakotay torture scenes were good. And yeah, I thought it was actually really powerful when Chakotay tells Janeway it means something to me that she disciplined. I thought that was a very strong character moment. As I said, season 2 has much stronger character moments than later seasons, 100%. Except for season 4, but anyway. So that is it for my review of Maneuvers. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, that sort of thing if you want to help the channel out. And if you really want to help the channel out, you could do so by supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in that there description below. Different tiers, different rewards, such as Patreon-only series of videos where I revisit reviews I've already made. You can leave comments for me to read my reviews like I just did, and pre-releases and other stuff like that. If you are interested, you can check it out. So, let's see what's coming up next on the channel. On Wednesday, I'll be doing a Patreon-requested video, the top 10 worst Star Trek villains. On Thursday, I'll be reviewing the latest episode of Strange New World, Season 3, Episode 5. And then on Saturday, over on Patreon for one of those patron-exclusive videos I was talking about, where I revisit my review for Our Man Bashir. So that's what's coming up on the channel. Please be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Deep Space Nine and many other videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.